Welcome once again to the Week in Focus and Sid Caudle. Sid, you've been, having a bit of a relaxing time, I believe, in London. And you're one of the few people that like to go to London these days. Why?
Well, today I've been to prayer for Parliament, which is I do very much enjoy going inside Parliament and praying inside Parliament in one of the committee rooms. The attendance today was a bit less than expected, basically because of a tube strike. So all the tubes were off. So it meant that I had to walk from Blackfriars, which my train from Hitchin goes to, which was it's about 20-minute walk or so, or even more. But I have to confess that on the way back, in order to be here for your program, I jogged basically from Westminster to Blackfriars. But in
Well,
fact, in fact, it's probably not true to say that I jogged. I think I ran. I was
let's
probably
talk,
doing something around 7-minute miling pace.
let's talk about the RNT, our dear friends from the RMT. They've been causing havoc for years, Sid. They're greedy, they're paid more than airline pilots. Now, not only do they want a big pay rise, having held southern region hostage for donkey's years and caused absolute chaos to certain people's working life, they're doing it again. But this time they want 32 hours. I'm sorry, Sid, no government's got any guts in the United Kingdom. Certainly this present one hasn't because it wants funding from the unions.
Well, interesting enough, I mean, I totally agree with you. I think 32 hours is ridiculous. I mean, I remember the days when people were working 40 hours a week, but 35 hours to me is the minimum that people should be working. You can't say, oh, I'm sorry, we only want to work 32 hours and we want more time off. We want to do a 4-day week and have a day off every week, and then, and then we'll work 8 hours a day for 4 days, and the rest of it we'll put our feet up. Well, I mean, that's if you're running your own business, which I did for about 15 years. I mean, I didn't run my own business all my life, but I did for about 15 years. You don't work for 32 hours and then say, all right, that's it, I'm clocking off. You work whatever hours you need to bring the money in. And I'm afraid that it's just totally unacceptable for people working in the public sector to say we're going to work for 32 hours and then we're going to put our feet up. It's just unacceptable, full stop. I think 40 hours, frankly, is more appropriate.
But what do you do about it?
Well, basically, it's down to Sadiq Khan, really. I mean, he's in charge of Transport for London, and that's where the strike's coming from. It's not actually down to the government. You talk to the unions and you try and negotiate with them and you try and get some sort of reasonable approach. But if the unions are completely unreasonable and say, I'm sorry, well, that's it, then you've got no alternative but to bring in agency staff. So basically, what you do is you turn around to the unions and say, well, I'm sorry, this is our final offer, whatever. I mean, you do try and negotiate, do try and show some flexibility, but ultimately you say, this is our final offer. If you refuse to accept it, then you're all sacked and we're bringing in agency staff to run the trains.
Well, there is another elephant in the room here. In fact, two elephants. One is Tony Blair, that set up all these mayoral ridiculous um, positions of power. You can argue for that or against it. I'm against it. Causes lots of division. That's a discussion for another day. And then you've got Sadiq Khan.
Yeah.
And well, what do I say? You get lost for words with that man, but he's responsible for this as well. And
Yes, of
you've got
course. Yes.
another layer of bureaucracy there. No wonder nothing gets done.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Transport for London is under the London Mayor, so it's ultimately the London Mayor's responsibility. But it's interesting when Labour came to power, and they suddenly found the money to pay off everybody that was on strike, including the train drivers. And so they must have just given the money to Sadiq Khan and said, "Okay, we'll find the money for you in your budget. Give them what they're asking for." What they did wrong there was to not to demand something in return. You see, when Boris Johnson was Mayor of London, for instance, he said, right, I'm closing all the ticket offices. So people are just going to buy tickets at machines rather than walking up to somebody physically sitting in an office in the London Underground in the majority of situations. Maybe the odd place like King's Cross, St Pancras, where there's a lot of tourists, will maintain a ticket office. But for the vast majority of stations, it'll just be machines. And of course, they didn't like it, but he basically said, well, that's what I'm doing. And, okay, I'll pay you a bit extra, in return, and he got the prize of running the trains a lot more efficiently with fewer staff in return for higher wages. Now, if that's what you're doing, you're achieving something. If you just turn around and say, "Oh, okay, I'll increase your wages with nothing in return," with no increased efficiency, then you're throwing away money. And once you start throwing away money, and paying higher wages for nothing in return, then the union's going to come back for more. And that's what's happened, you see. They've just thrown away money, gives them whatever they wanted, and now they're saying, oh, now we want a 32-hour week. I mean, it's the Labour Party's approach which basically encouraged the union approach.
Yeah, there's very little difference, frankly, between war in the absolute sense. You can keep giving way to dictators, and they eventually have the last laugh. And it's the same with these unions. Clearly, they're very communist in their outlook. They would want to bring down any democracy. That's written in stone. We have got to declare war from a business point of view against these people. Face them down.
Well, I think what the unions are doing, and by the way, as we speak, the Trade Union Congress is underway.
Yes.
And at the Trade Union Congress, there are an increasing number of speakers that are attacking the Labour government, which you don't normally get at TUC because most of the TUC unions are giving money to the Labour Party. That's their government. But there's an increasing feeling among unions that Keir Starmer's not doing a good job. He's doing a very bad job. And some unions talking about disaffiliating from the Labour Party. See, they're probably seeing Jeremy Corbyn's party possibly in the background, or the Green Party, which is more left wing than Keir Starmer. They're seeing those parties as another option and saying, okay, well, we've got another option. We don't have to give all our money to Labour. And maybe, if we take all our money off Labour, they might come round and start changing, and they might start giving us what we want. If they don't, then we'll just pursue these other parties and help them out.
We move on. And something that happened about a fortnight ago, of course, the dreaded autumn cap came on 1755 for energy prices. Wasn't going up much, but it shouldn't be going up at all. We're already the dearest in Europe and practically the world. And talk about a cheek. Michael Shanks, the government minister here, I'll quote him. It's so that we can get off the roller coaster of fossil fuel prices. What other countries are doing? They're paying much less than us on that roller coaster. And he goes on to say, bringing in clean, homegrown power we control. I mean, he's got the most fantastic strapline writer that I can think ever existed. I mean, that is just gobbledygook. It's lies.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting that in this cabinet reshuffle we've just had, we're told that Keir Starmer wanted to get rid of Ed Miliband and apparently tried to sack him, but he couldn't. So Ed Miliband has been pursuing rabidly this green agenda. I mean, absolutely rabidly. He's said we can't have any more oil or gas from the North Sea, which is just utter nonsense. And all of our energy has got to come from renewable sources, and we're going to build some new nuclear plants because nuclear plants supposedly produce clean energy. Well, they don't, because you've got the decommissioning costs involved, and you've got to dispose of them at some stage, and there's going to be radioactivity there, but there's no carbon, you see, and because there's no carbon in nuclear, then it doesn't matter, it's all part of the net zero. But as I've said before, the whole net zero agenda is complete and utter nonsense because carbon isn't harmful. Carbon is part of the natural climate. And if we have a bit more carbon, it actually produces a bit more green and a bit more growth and more plants. So, the whole green agenda is complete nonsense. And the fact that, they told us at the last election that if we pursue the green agenda, then it's going to bring down gas and electric prices. Quite the opposite. It's put up gas and electric prices, as you said, quite substantially. And we now, in the UK, have the most expensive energy in Europe. So, the whole environment agenda, the whole green agenda pursued by Ed Miliband is proving to be higher cost gas and electric prices, and it's just nonsense. And even Starmer apparently recognised it's nonsense because he's tried to sack Ed Miliband.
Why can't you get rid of him, Sid? What's stopping him going?
Well, what would have happened there is that he would have called in Ed Miliband and said, I've decided that I want to move you. I'm going to move you. I'm going to make you housing secretary. I'm going to give you reign of responsibilities because, we need somebody, with your sort of experience in housing. And Ed Miliband just said, no, I'm not willing to move. And Keir Starmer Keir Starmer said, well, in that case, you're going to have to resign. And he said, well, I'm not willing to resign. If you want rid of me, you're going to have to sack me. And the problem is that Ed Miliband is very popular with the Labour Party because the Labour Party love his green agenda. He love this nonsense agenda. I mean, they all think it's wonderful. They think Ed Miliband's done a wonderful job. He's one of the most popular ministers in the Labour Party, not in the country as a whole, but in the Labour Party, he's one of the most popular ministers. So if Keir Starmer now turns around and says, I'm sacking to Ed Miliband, I'm sacking you, the party's going to be even more in revolt than they are at the moment. So that's what's happened. He's tried to move him and he said no, and then he's basically said, well, you'll have to resign, and Ed Miliband has said no, and that's the end of the story.
My goodness, what pickle we are in. Talking about pickles, I wonder if Farage has committed a minor sin with him saying, oh, we'll return them all to Afghanistan. Now, I have mentioned this before, and we've mentioned the fact that actually they're building 21 new cities because they want the people that have run away back. So the chances of them all being killed are not really, or they've been overstated. Further than that, Nigel has said you can have £2,500 cash if you want to go back. And there you are, we'll pay that. And it won't apply to women and certainly not children. Now, I smell her right here, like everybody that's either got power or possibly or probably coming to power, he's already watering it down, isn't he?
Well, we did discuss this last week, but I think we have to be honest and say that the Afghan government is a very nasty government, and they are persecuting some people in Afghanistan and treating them very harshly. Now, I've come to the conclusion that the majority of people coming over here in small boats are part of a deliberate agenda to make the West more Islamic. But that's not necessarily 100% of the people that come over have that agenda. There may be some other people that have got hold of the people smugglers that are genuinely, desperately fleeing persecution. Now, that's why we support the Rwanda option. Because if you literally say, OK, we're sending you to Rwanda, it's going to act as a major deterrent, and was already, by the way, acting as a deterrent even before they started it, because the numbers coming across were diminished and there were increasing numbers going to Ireland. But that's soon shifted back again when they scrapped the plan. But the advantage of Rwanda is that you can actually consider Are there some people here that are genuinely fleeing persecution that if we send back, they're going to be murdered or put in prison for no good reason? And that could easily happen in Afghanistan. So those people that genuinely now need help have got to be weeded out and got to and can't be sent back. Now it may be only 10% of everybody that comes over, or maybe even less, maybe even 5%. But if 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 20 of the people that we're sending back to Afghanistan are being put to death or put in prison for no good reason, then I'm sorry, that's unacceptable. So we do have to find an alternative to just sending everybody back.
Well, let me read you something that's just been sent to me. And people are now saying, well, what do you expect, Britain? You're offering this, you're offering that. No wonder people want to come to Britain. Now, penalty for illegal entry into the following countries: Singapore, 6 months in jail; Russia, 2 years hard labour; Pakistan, 10 years in jail; India, 8 years in jail; North Korea, death; Great Britain, free housing, food, mobile phone, cash, etc., etc. Other countries can do it, Sid, but we can't.
Well, yes, absolutely. The way we're handling the asylum situation is as if everybody coming here was desperate and destitute and fleeing persecution and needing our help. That's the way we're treating it. But they're not facing the reality that that is not what's going on. But it's typical, I'm afraid, it's typical of the left. They tend to be extremely naive, especially when it comes to Muslims. I mean, they haven't grasped that one of the key tenets of Islam is it's a good thing to lie to your enemies in order to gain an advantage. And if these people coming over are not honest people. I mean, if they were all completely honest people who were turning up and saying, yeah, I'm in desperate trouble, please help me, then, they'd be right. But since they're not honest people and they're just playing games and fooling us and just enjoying a free ride in hotels with their free mobile phone, etc., what we're doing is blatantly stupid and ridiculous. That's the reality of it.
To sum this up, I've just been sent a photograph, and it's too late to put on the screen now, I'm afraid. But there's lots wrong with our dear old GB at the moment. One is the fishing, but that's been wrong for donkey's years. We've just given way to everybody in the fishing. There's a picture taken as they haul by crane a fishing net, a big fishing net, which is full. And this is the new type of fishing. And sure enough, the net releases the catch, and all they've got is thousands of passports. Says everything, Sid.
I've never seen that.
Picture speaking 1,000 words and more there, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I mean, it is true that the people that come across the channel are advised to throw away the passports. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Don't let them know who you are. Don't let them know your name. Make up a false name. Tell them that you're fleeing persecution. I mean, it's just ridiculous, isn't it?
It is. And let's go more ridiculous, because there are certain big companies that are sucked into this nonsense. One of them, of course, is the Co-op, who's now refusing, they are now refusing to buy any goods from Israel. There you go. Won't be the first time, or no doubt the last. In fact, it's got that bad. They're actually buying Palestinian beer and selling it. I mean, that is shocking, Sid.
Well, it's basically what's going on is that they're believing lies. And you see, it's all come home to roost with me with the fact that very recently Israel killed a guy called Abu Ubaidah. Abu Ubaidah was basically head of publicity for the Hamas. He was basically the equivalent of Goebbels under Hitler. So he was responsible for all the images that were being sent out and all the messages. So all this stuff about genocide and killing children and all the everyone being killed as women and children and everyone starving and all these sort of messages are just false propaganda. That's what they are. But the problem is that they're not being recognized as such by the media. Quite the opposite. The BBC just soaks up all this false propaganda and puts it out as fact. And I think the worst, by the way, is the fact that when Israel set up the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation with the help of the United States, which has funded most of it, and started giving aid direct to the people rather than giving it through Hamas, which the United Nations has been, they obviously it was going to be a difficult process. And Hamas threatened the people, don't go. If you go, then you'll be in big trouble. And tried to stop the people going, but they couldn't. And there's literally been millions and millions of meals given to the people through the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Now, I've heard the guy that is actually in charge of it, by the way, is a Christian. He's a wonderful Christian guy. And he was talking about all the problems they faced and what they've done. And he's not only have Hamas actually killed a busload of Gaza Humanitarian Foundation workers who were all Palestinian, they've also, believe it or not, fired a rocket at one of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation depots where they were handing out aid. Fortunately, it missed. Just imagine, though, that if it had hit, they'd have literally just been killing thousands of people that are trying to, just as they're trying to get aid, but they missed. They haven't actually, no one receiving aid has actually been killed. The only fighting has gone on the fringes outside of the area. But the fighting's all been caused by Hamas. So it's all been caused by Hamas shooting at people and Israel trying to defend them. Now, under the propaganda message is Israel's been shooting at people when they've been going to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation to get aid. Now, anybody with an ounce of intelligence will know Israel has set up these centres to give aid direct to the people. They're doing it with the help of America, who's their supporter. Why on earth would they want to shoot at people who are getting aid? I mean, but one of the key tenets of Goebbels, Hamas, false propaganda is you blame Israel for everything you do. So they shoot at people and they say Israel shooting at people. Mm-hmm. They put all their fighters into the hospitals to so that people in hospital act as human shields, and they put all their tunnels underneath hospitals, and then they say Israel's bombing people, bombing hospitals. They're deliberately killing people in hospitals. But it's just everybody with an ounce of sense knows that it's all false propaganda. It's Hamas that's causing the problems, not Israel. But you see, the thing is, the co-op soaks up this false propaganda. The BBC soaks it all up. Other fake news media like Sky News, they all soak it all up. So they tell everyone, oh, Israel's killing people who are getting aid. Israel's bombing the hospitals. Israel's bombing the schools. Israel's just killing all the children. All the children are starving and Israel's refusing to give them any aid. It's all lies, lies. And by the way, on that last point, the United Nations have been employing Hamas fighters. We know that. Some of the terrorists that actually went over on October the 7th were employed by the United Nations. And the United Nations is insisting all aid must go through Hamas. But at the same time, they've produced figures to say that only around 10% of the aid lorries which they've sent in have actually got to the destination. Roughly 10%. 90% of the aid has been stolen by Hamas that the United Nations has been administering. It's only the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that's actually getting free aid direct to the people. The United Nations aren't doing it. They're failing. They're failing completely. But At the same time, they're helping Hamas. Unbelievable.
I think we've got to look again at the spread of Marxism in all this, whether we're looking at the United Nations that were set up brilliantly. We can even look back to the foundations of the Labour Party, and it was Christian. And look where it is now. Again, Marxism is ruining everything. They know who to target, don't they?
Well, the reality is that there have been times in the past when we've had some excellent people who've been head of the United Nations and they've done some excellent work around the world. But the guy who's in charge of the United Nations now, Antonio Guterres, is a socialist. He's come from being head of a left-wing government. And during his time as head of the United Nations, the whole UN has changed. It's now pushing abortion in Africa. It's pushing same-sex marriage to any country that hasn't adopted same-sex marriage. These are all done under human rights. It's virulently anti-Israel, amazingly, incredibly anti-Israel. As I say, they've actually been employing Hamas fighters on the UN payroll. And, all over the world, the United Nations is now pursuing socialist policies. They've been cozying up to China. China's got a tremendous amount of influence, far more influence now in the United Nations than America has, incredibly, even though the headquarters are in New York. So, America now under Trump has got to the point where they started defunding them, started defunding parts of them. They're defunding UNRWA, for instance, which was operating in Gaza. So, America just said, we're not paying you anymore. UNICEF, they've reduced the funding enormously. But I'm afraid it's the UN leadership right now that's to blame for the direction which they're taking, which is just terrible.
We were talking about nuclear about 10 minutes ago, Sid, and been handed a piece of paper, a report indeed, that shows the safety stroke cost of various forms of electricity. Nuclear comes out best by a million miles, 90% on a percentage basis, whereas if you're looking at something like wind and solar panels, they're down to about 30% on the same scale. There's just no comparison. Of course, you've got the add-on factor of getting rid of the toxic stuff, but that doesn't bridge that sort of a gap. Why haven't we got more like France? Well, can I suggest one thing? Our political system is short-termism. We're only interested in the next 5 years, and when it takes 15 to 25 years to build a nuclear power station, we're not interested, are we?
No, that's it, you see, but it does depend on how you calculate, the cost of electricity. If you take into account the cost of building the nuclear power station, plus the cost of decommissioning and the environmental effects of the decommissioning, and you factor all that in, then obviously you get a different figure than if you just look at the marginal cost. The marginal cost being, once the plant is built, the cost of using that electricity, which will be very low, very low. But, it's not the only cost. And this is why, frankly, that oil and gas, it doesn't cost anything like as much to build oil and gas power stations. So that's why they actually work out overall a lot better, even though the marginal cost might be more.
There you go. Let's come on to Big Brother in a big way, the EU. Now, they're not liking certain things that are appearing on X. And they've set up, what a cheek, its own fact checker, the EU's own fact checker, to ban and get fines out there against various X particularly, and there's no reason why they can't do it with anybody. If their own fact checker is not agreed with in Europe, then they have you. Now, that defies gravity, Sid, because as we know, the EU consists of the most undemocratic form of government that's been invented. 32,000 Eurocrats deciding on what the next law they're going to pass. And boy, have they passed some stupid laws. We have no rights. MEPs got no power virtually, certainly not to put new acts of EU parliamentary stuff up there. And they've got the cheek to say we're going to do our own fact checking in future. Wow, 1984 here with a vengeance, isn't it?
Well, yes, I mean, at one level, you could say, well, fact checking is very good because they're looking in depth at what's being said and making sure that what's being said is correct. But the problem is that you see, the BBC, for instance, have their fact checkers. And when you look at it, you see a lot depends on where they're coming from and what facts they're including and what facts they're excluding. And I'm afraid the EU are fact checking with an agenda, and they're fact checking with an agenda that they don't want certain facts to come out. I mean, what I've said already on this program about Islam is just one thing. I mean, the EU fact checker is never going to look as to whether Muslims are actually telling the truth or not. They're not going to bother to look at that because that doesn't suit their agenda to look at that question.
Well, we got to swiftly move on because Ms. Reeves has been getting away with it because of all the shenanigans, of course, going on at the moment. And Sir Keir is not getting rid of her for various reasons. And she denies absolutely that things are in that much of a mess that we will have to go to the IMF for a bailout sooner or later. It will happen. That's the consensus of leading economists, almost without exception. Let's hope they're wrong, but at least they'll step in and control what she's doing. It all depends on the autumn budget, of course, what she's got up her sleeve. She's going to raise 50 billion. Well, so she reckons. Where's she going to get it from? Well, the favourite thing at the moment, of course, is the middle class, whoever they are. Labour are into class big time, especially house owners. There's all sorts of things, especially inheritance tax. It's cruelty to those that would never vote. They're not stupid. They get at those that would never vote for them, Sid.
Well, yes, but it's interesting. They've actually become unstuck, haven't they? Because you see that they think, for instance, one thing they've done is, greatly increase stamp duty on second homes. And we're going to get
Yes.
the rich with their second homes. And all of a sudden, there's Angela Rayner gets her second home, and she has to pay the higher rate of stamp duty which she's imposed, or which the Labour Party have imposed, to get the rich. And she thinks, oh, I don't want to pay that. It's ridiculous amount of money to pay, and another 70,000 of stamp duty. That's crazy. I'm going to pay the 30,000, which is the price for your main home. I'm not paying this extra 40,000. But in doing so, she's avoided taxes which other people have got to pay, and now she's lost her job over it. But she's absolutely right, of course, that this paying an extra 40,000 of stamp duty just to buy, buying a second home is completely unreasonable. But if we look at the broader picture, I mean, I can't spell this out clearly enough. I mean, the right approach is to cut revenue spending, which, as I've said before, cut quangos, cut red tape, cut all these social requirements on government contracts, get rid of all this woke stuff that's going on, all these things that you can do, and after you've cut revenue spending, you maintain or increase capital spending. As we've said, money should be spent on a new London airport in the Thames estuary, and all the railway links up to it, including linking HS2 up to it, link a new railway to the Channel Tunnel, and you make an enormous amount of money by doing that because you bring in enormous amounts of wealth to the country by doing that. So you maintain or increase capital spending and then you cut taxes. So you actually encourage enterprise, you encourage wealthy people to come into the country, you increase wealth production in the country. Then everything functions well and everything works well, and you have a happy people, and because everyone's happy and everything's working well, you can then afford to maybe spend more on pet projects, or whatever. But the way Rachel Reeves doing is exactly the opposite of what I've just described. She's greatly increased revenue spending. So we've had a massive increase in quangos, which I've explained before is actually now an increase of 188 billion in real terms from what it was in 2010. I mean, that's the extent of the increase in red tape. Enormous amount of money. About 50 billion extra being spent on government contracts, which cost about 500 billion a year, all government contracts. But because we've added these additional social requirements, that's roughly an extra 50 billion. Plus, we would bring in money from a turnover tax, but a turnover tax would just be to get money off international companies that don't pay corporation tax. So to get more tax off them that are trading here, we have a turnover tax and have to pay a percentage of their turnover. And that, by the way, would encourage people to be based in the UK because we would offset it against corporation tax, so British companies would pay less. So far from sending companies abroad, that would be encouraging more companies to come and be based in the UK. And that would bring in about another 40 billion. Now, these are things, enormous sums of money. I mean, what I've just described to you works out that roughly a third of all government spending. So we're talking about enormous amounts of money. Now, if we use that money for capital spending and use it to cut taxes, we'd have a very prosperous country. Rachel Reeves is increasing revenue spending enormously, cutting capital spending, and increasing taxes drastically. Now that's the path she's going down, and the extent to which it's not working is the extent to which the deficit has gone up from 54 billion when she came into office to 148 billion now, which is roughly the increase in spending on quangos, has all gone in debt. Now, you see, when you increase debt to that extent, what should happen is that you get a lot of growth in the economy because you've borrowed enormous amount of extra money to create lots of new jobs. So because you created all these new jobs with all this extra money that you've borrowed, you should have a large amount of growth in the economy. And this is what Labour Party expected would happen. If they spent all this extra money, we'll get a lot of extra growth. We're going for growth. And everyone will say, look how well we've done. Look how we've grown the economy. But because they've cut capital spending and because they've increased taxes, rather than getting a lot of extra growth in the economy from this debt, they've actually got negative growth now, or we're completely in the doldrums. We've had 2 months of negative growth, and then we've got maybe 0.3, but it's just completely in the doldrums, our growth. So it's just everything isn't working. And she carries on down this road, spending more money, revenue spending, cutting capital spending, increasing taxes. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse, and we're going to end up with the International Monetary Fund. And the International Monetary Fund are going to come along, as they did in the 1970s, and say, number one, you've got to cut revenue spending. They'll force it, they'll impose it as a condition of giving a loan. And by the way, if people don't understand, the reason why we have to go to the International Monetary Fund is because we can't afford to pay the state pensions to pensioners. We can't afford to pay all the salaries of NHS workers and the salaries of teachers and so on and so forth. We've run out of money, and we try and borrow some extra money, but we've run out of borrowing because we can't borrow anymore because the cost of borrowing has gone up to such a level that it's just impossible for us to borrow anymore. So we've got nothing to do now other than to get a loan from somewhere else. It's national humiliating.
A number of things you said there sends shivers up my spine, Sid. The first was a quote from the World Economic Forum songbook, and that is that hand over the stuff to us, we'll look after you, give us your houses, and you will be happy. Now, there's traces of this in this present government in various forms. The other thing that brought to mind the lovely Angela, and it's a skeleton at the moment banging on that cupboard door, and that is the true value of her house in Ashton-under-Lyne, which is quite a bit more than she's put down on paper. This is clearly a device to give her to give the trust an advantage. Now, this goes on quite freely, but it shouldn't be morally acceptable. So she's done quite a lot along the way. And so have many other government ministers. And I tell you what, Sid, they've never had any business experience. They don't know what they're doing. No wonder they're all failing. I mean, look at Angela in charge of building houses. I mean, it's less than half what that she promised by the end of the term. 1.5 million new homes. Rubbish. And I'll tell you what tells the truth. The price of cement. To build houses, of course. Even though we use bricks, we still use cement. 75-year low, the price of cement. And we have to buy the stuff now from abroad because cement uses a lot of electricity to manufacture it. That is the true barometer of what's happening. They're failing in practically every department.
Well, yes. As far as housing is concerned, though, we do have to be a little bit cautious because in the 1960s, they had this ridiculous process that, everything was number of houses, number of houses. Now, at that time, they were dealing with slum clearance. And you were talking about a lot of houses in the country that didn't even have bathrooms in them. So, the only thing that a house had was an outside toilet. And, there was no toilet inside your house and you had no bathroom. So you literally had to fill a bath up in the kitchen to have a bath. And these were considered to be slum properties, and a lot of them were damp, a lot of them were in very bad condition. So in order to clear the slums, they set to work to build large numbers of new properties. And all the focus was on numbers, 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 numbers. The problem was they had such a focus on numbers, they then built rubbish houses. I mean, that's where all these some high-rise flats came from. So you had large numbers of high-rise flats built to get the numbers up quickly. And now we're in a situation where a lot of those high-rise flats are having to come down because they're just absolute monstrosities. And what they created were terrible communities. So we can't afford to only focus on numbers. We've also got to look at quality, the quality of the housing we're building. Now, the reason, though, that we're having to build this large number of new houses is it's because of the increase in the population, most of which has come through immigration. Now, I'm sorry to say this, but that's the reality of it. And I actually knocked on houses myself, which are standard terraced houses where you would expect first-time buyers to be. And I found that the majority of people I was calling on were saying, "I'm sorry, I can't speak English." So, first-time buyers are completely priced out of what should be the first-time buyers' properties. And increasingly, first-time buyers are buying flats. And if they are good quality flats, which with proper security, it doesn't matter. I mean, it was my stepdaughter had a beautiful flat in Canning Town that was built there. It was a really lovely flat with security and, these days people don't want gardens as much as they did at one time. So to build quality flats, in good locations, is not a problem. I don't have a problem with that. It's when they build low quality flats and just put them up and just any old house will do. We can't afford to take that approach. We really cannot.
Finally, so we've got to turn to our favourite sport of footy. I say it's a favourite sport. Well, I don't know. I like quite a lot of sports. I know you do. But let's concentrate on the footy. We'll start with the England-Andorra match. People are getting fed up. The season's just started and it's ready to go, go, go. But it's not. We got this fortnight of rest just because some international persons want to make some more money. And England are left playing with Andorra. I mean, sorry, I did watch it. I wasn't going to watch it. Fell asleep halfway, not surprised. Half the crowd left. The rest of the crowd, interestingly, was singing. Keir Starmer is a W. We won't press the full meaning of that. That in its own shows the palpable paucity of this present government spread to the terraces now. So where Labour are going to get their vote from next time, I don't know. They're hoping in 4 years, 3.5 years, they can turn it around. But there again, another argument. So here we are, people making money out of football. There's too much money in football. There's too much money in cricket. They've got their own problems with the short game. The standards are falling. We daren't play a test because we want to make some money. You get £15,000 for appearing in a 5-day test. You get far more than that in the 100 game, over and done with within a couple of hours. The whole thing's standing on its head at the moment. So do we say to our powers that be, this is the FA mostly, too much football, too much international football. Why should we be playing Andorra? Well, I'll repeat that. Why should we be playing Andorra? They are making a mockery of us. England cannot play forward like most of the Premiership. They diddle-daddle, playing sideways and backwards, and they got what they deserve. They scored 1 goal, England, against Andorra. Remember the times when we used to play sides like this, Sid? And it was 12-0.
Yes, I mean, obviously, Andorra just defended. They didn't. They had no ambition of trying to score. So it was obviously that's why it became a boring match because England are just trying to break down a side that's just trying to defend. But I think the Nations League is a much better approach. You know, it's actually not a good thing for Andorra to be playing England, frankly. It's not good for Andorra. It's much better if Andorra are playing Gibraltar or Faroe Islands or other nations that are similar standard to them. And, you know, and if you have a sort of Nations League where, you know, every nation in the low level is playing other nations of a similar standard, and nations at the top level, like England, are playing Germany and France and Italy, and you know they're doing it under the Nations League. It makes it for a lot more interesting football. And frankly, I don't think there's anything wrong at all in saying your qualifications for the World Cup should come from people who are in the first division of the Nations League. I mean, there's nothing wrong with saying that. So you should then get rid of all this World Cup qualification based on, you know, being drawn out of a hat, you know, and do it based on the Nations League, so that you know you become in the top of the league and you qualify for the World Cup automatically, and it makes for more interest in the World Cup. For the World Cup, you should have the very best nations there. So you know, I think that's the way forward. We've started down that road, and I think we've got to go down that road and much further. And as I say, I'm not. It's not just this will be much better for England. It'll also be much better for Andorra and all these smaller countries. It'll be better for Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland as well, because they'll sit in the middle. They'll still be possible for them to qualify, but they'll have to work hard against nations of a similar quality to them. And you know, it's just like, you know, if every game that we were watching was Man United against Grimsby, you know, it would be like it's not interesting football. You want Manchester United to be playing Manchester City and Liverpool. You know, those are the interesting games.
Well, Neil Warnock has gone on the circuit. Now, he's actually been manager for more clubs than anybody else ever, about 1,700 and something, and a bit of a character. He's not had the highlights and the great success. But he's going on, and I believe he's right about player power. He's appearing, I think it's next week at the Palladium, 3,000 seat sellout. He's, I repeat, quite a character. Language is a bit industrial, goes with the job, I suppose. And he's going to put some truths out there. And one of the things he's going to say is basically about player power. And that is, as an anecdote, he said one day he was coming after his team had lost into the bathing area. They all jump into the big bath. Well, they did then. And he pointed out to one player, "You should be ashamed of your blankety blanky self. Hide your head in shame." Now, he said, that would not happen today because this guy's agent would be onto me, threatening me with everything. Now, hang on. Players are signing contracts and they're not keeping to them. Rashford is an example of that. He didn't really want to play for United for a couple of years. And many others, of course. Newcastle have suffered under this. I want to go. Finished up at Liverpool. They've got more power than they should have, Sid, and more money.
Yes, this is interesting. There's two issues here. You see, the first issue is the Bosman rule, which prior to that, basically the clubs owned the players, and no player could leave without their club's permission throughout their career. And anybody that did leave had to be purchased under the, with the transfer fee. That used to be the rule. And then Bosman came along and said, that's not right. The players should be allowed to choose what contracts they want. And if they say they don't want to stay with that club and they want to go to another club, they should have every right to do so. Now, that was agreed by the courts. So players are no longer owned by the clubs. They're now able to decide what contracts they want to sign. It gets more complicated, of course, when players sign long-term contracts and then decide after signing a long-term contract they want to move. Now that's what's happened with Isak. He had a contract with Newcastle to 2030. But then Liverpool came along and said, we want this player. He's one of the best players in the Premiership. And Isak said, Liverpool want me. Right, I want to go to Liverpool. Now, he had a contract that he'd signed with Newcastle to 2030. So there's no reason why Newcastle should have to sell him.
Yeah.
But ultimately, I guess Liverpool came along with enough money. I mean, initially Liverpool offered about 120 million, and Newcastle said, no, we don't want to sell him for 120 million. I'm sorry, he's our player. He's contracted for another 4 years. He's one of the best strikers in the Premiership. We want him here. And we don't care. You can keep your 120 million. But then Liverpool came back with another offer, and Isak made it clear he wanted to go and he didn't want to play for Newcastle anymore. That is wrong, frankly. That is totally wrong. Now, if you compare that with what Gahey's done, you see Gahey's only got a contract to 2026 with Crystal Palace. So next year, he's going to go for nothing because Crystal Palace can't force him to stay beyond his contract. So Liverpool offered about 30 million for him, and Crystal Palace agreed because he's going to go for nothing next year. But then, for some reason, it didn't go through. I don't quite frankly know why it didn't go through. But he's got every right to go for nothing. And he didn't say to Crystal Palace, "Oh, I'm not going to play for you anymore. I want to go to Liverpool." He just carried on playing for Crystal Palace. I mean, he captained them in a brilliant FA Cup victory. He captained them in the Charity Shield victory. And he's just carried on playing for his club as per normal. That is the right thing, frankly, and you've got to admire him because what he did was absolutely right, even though he didn't get his move. But his contract is winding down, so.
There you go, Sid. Time's gone. We sorted politics out, both sides of the pond, mainly in UK. That's more in need, maybe, at the moment. And we certainly sorted football out. Let's hope it gets better. Thank you, Sid.
Cheers.